everybody, it's jrobi. Today we're going to be taking a look at a chess trap in the Ruy Lopez Berlin Defence line, and it's called a fishing pole trap, and sometimes it's even called a fishing pole variation. And a big proponent of this trap, and it's played by black by the way, but a big proponent of the trap is Life Master Brian Wall, who has a very strong reputation in the chess community. And apparently he heard about it from a gentleman by the name of Jack Young that he was living with at the time, back when he was together with a number of chess players. And it's a very interesting trapping line in that it doesn't really sacrifice your position horribly in the opening, and it kind of throws your opponent off balance, especially as the Ruy Lopez players. There's a number of large variations that they have to learn, and to take them out of book and to take them into position and uncharted territory can never be a bad thing, especially when you're not really sacrificing your position in the process. So we're going to take a look at it here, and we'll go back to the beginning. For those not familiar, the Ruy Lopez's opening played by white, king to pawn to e4, black plays pawn to e5. White now develops the knight to f3, and black plays knight to c6, and now white brings the bishop down to b5. So this is a standard Ruy Lopez opening from white. And from here, black has a number of options. Black can play knight to f6, of course, which is the Berlin defense, which is what we're going to get into. Of course, other good moves for black here is pawn to a6, bishop to c5 is another good one, and even f5 if you're playing aggressively. But nonetheless, in this line here, it deals with the Berlin defense, so black's going to play knight up to f6. Now from here, white's going to castle. Now white also, if we just flip back a move, white's got some other move options available as well. For example, white can play something like a d3, for example, before castling. White can also play the knight to c3 before castling. But the most popular move in this position is simply to castle from white, and from here now black has a number of options. Most common you'll see here would be bishop to c5. Sometimes you'll even see here bishop to e7, or even a pawn push here to d6. And it looks on the surface like black can come in and snag up the pawn here on e4, but that's met very handedly by white by simply playing either rook over to e1 or even pushing the pawn immediately up to d4, and white's going to get that material back and have a slightly better position than black. But that's some typical moves that can be played. We're going to get into the trapping move because this is when we're going to play it, and the move itself is a very crazy looking move on the surface, but it's interesting. First of all, it's going to take your opponent right out of book. That's guaranteed. Second of all, it's not really going to damage your position substantially. The opening engines will say that white has an advantage slightly, but we're so early in the opening and there's no tactical liabilities that this trap is going to cause. So the engine analysis itself is very unreliable. But the move itself is knight to g4, and it just looks completely crazy. But it's a very interesting move, and we're going to take a look at some possibilities here. By far the most obvious move here for white is going to be to kick that knight immediately by playing pawn to h3. But that's exactly what black wants white to play, because after white plays pawn to h3, black is now going to push the pawn up to h5. And if this isn't a crazy looking position early in a Ruy Lopez game, I'm not too sure what would be a crazy looking position. And from here, you're pretty much guaranteed that your opponent is going to be out of their comfort zone, especially if they're well versed in the Ruy Lopez lines and they play the standard variations a lot. But from here now, white has some decisions to make. If white is going to play materialistically, white can see here obviously that white can gain a piece early in the opening, and that's the main trapping line actually. So let's say white captures the knight here on g4, thinking that it's going to snag up that knight here for pretty much for free. Black's going to retake with the pawn now, attacking the knight on f3. And let's see what carnage happens to the position here once that knight falls back to e1. Black has got a beautiful move in this position. I'm not sure if you can see it yet. Take a couple seconds if you want, pause the video. But take a look at this queen, and where that queen is eyeing. And so from here, black is going to play queen to h4. And what is white going to do in this position? The queen is supported by the rook bearing down on h1 for checkmate. White has to give the king an escape square, maybe pushing the pawn up here to f4, but it's all over at this point. There's nothing that white's going to be able to do to stop the game from being lost, because in this position, even though the king has an escape square, black's just going to take that away by pushing the pawn up now to g3, and there's absolutely nothing that white can do to stop the checkmate. King can no longer escape from f2. The pawn and the queen and the rook are all bearing down here on h2 to deliver the checkmate. And really the only thing that white could possibly do in this position would be to delay checkmate by bringing the queen down here to h5, and black's just going to take it and checkmate shortly thereafter. So it's just a brutal trap that you can probably catch a lot of your blitz players in. They're going to be completely unaware of the danger, and in a blitz game they're not going to take a huge amount of time to try to figure it out, and even if they do, it's time off of their clock. And interestingly enough, Brian Wall, who's like I said at the beginning of the video, is a big proponent of this trap, has actually won a fair amount of games in standard time control games. So the trapping line definitely has some possibilities. But let's take a look at a couple of different alternatives here that white and black can have that results from this variation. So I'm going to go back here to knight to g4, the first move of the trapping line. And let's say that white wants to completely ignore this knight to g4 move by playing, say, something like rook to e1. This is going to cause another beautiful trapping line that black can try to unleash against the white opponent. And from this position, black's going to play bishop to c5. And of course, this is giving the bishop scope here down to f2. Also, the knight is attacking f2. So from this position here, a good move from white would be to push the pawn up to d4, trying to limit the scope of this bishop. But from here now, black can just take with the knight, and when white's knight recaptures, black can put the queen now onto h4, and we're in another dangerous position all of a sudden, because now the queen is bearing down on h2. It's also bearing down here on f2, and white's going to have to do something about all of these threats that are building up in the position. White can bring the knight back to f3, attacking the queen, but the queen can just come in, hit the check. When the king goes to h1, the queen can come now into g1, and this is just a beautiful, beautiful smothered mate line, because it doesn't matter what white recaptures the queen with, it can capture with the knight, and it's checkmate, smothered mate, knight to f2. Just a beautiful line there. Alternatively, if we go back a move here, let's say white captures with the rook, it's the same thing, smothered checkmate. So that's one possibility that can take place after knight to g4 if black ignores it altogether and plays rook to e1. But let's go back to knight to g4 again, and let's actually go down the trapping line a little bit here and see what some other alternatives are. So from this position here, white can play once again h3, attacking the knight. Black's going to continue obviously with pawn to h5, otherwise it's just pointless putting the knight out there in the first place. And from here now, white has some very solid move options. White has the move d3 in this position. White also has the move knight to c3, and both of these moves are met by one move from black that's going to give you a dynamic and fighting game, and it's just bishop to c5. And there's a lot of threats in this position still. The position is still a fairly much equal position. This knight, of course, here over on g4 still can't be captured due to the mate threat that will result. And, the position is just, it's a wild position. It's dynamic. It's completely out of book. And from this point forward, you're going to be relying completely, almost exclusively, actually, on your tactical strength. So even if your opponent is more booked up than you in standard Berlin defense lines, you're going to have a nice fighting position to work with from here. So I definitely found the trap interesting, and I also found a video where I found out about it first on YouTube, where some user has posted a video that Brian Wall created. It wasn't Brian Wall's actual channel, so I'm going to include that link in the sidebar. You can take a look at that as well. Brian Wall goes through the trap, and he talks about a game in which a 1500 player defeated a grandmaster with the trapping line in a simul. Now the grandmaster didn't take the knight immediately, but his opponent was still able to secure the win with the gameplay that followed. So I found that video very interesting, and definitely encourage you to take a look. So take care, hope you enjoy the video, and we'll see you next time.